Open Your Eyes is brought to you by the Belize Bank. Our country, your bank.
Good morning. Welcome to Open Your Eyes.
Start your morning right.
I'm Marlene Cuellar.
And I'm Isana Kayatano.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Monday morning, another bright, hot. Did I say hot?
Yeah.
Of course. We're going to be checking in on our weather, actually. There she is. We got Francisca Wellington on the line. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How about you?
Not too bad. Ready to get the week started. And we got to start off by finding out what type of weather we're going to be experiencing.
Okay. Well, we continue to see warm and dry conditions. Sunny today, partly cloudy tonight. I'm not expecting any rainfall. And we have seen a decrease in the haziness.
Yeah?
That's right. Winds have shifted from the east to the east. Okay, and I believe that's part of what's helping us with the haze. And winds will be blowing 10 to 20 knots and producing moderate seas.
Okay. So you said the change in the wind is helping us with the haze. Last week you said that some of the smoke we were experiencing is actually coming from Honduras.
That's right. And remember, Honduras is southeast of us. We were having strong east to southeasterly winds last week. So those winds were bringing all that smokiness over us.
Okay.
But now the wind has shifted to the east, so we are getting cleaner air from over the sea.
Okay. Well, that's good. That would be a great break for people, especially as we keep up these very hot temperatures. I do note there's no 100-degree weather on the forecast.
Right. So we're seeing 88 along the coast this afternoon, 95 inland, and 84 up in the Mare Mountains. And then overnight temperatures, 81 along the coast, 74 inland, and 70 up in the Mare Mountains.
Extended forecast?
Okay, we'll continue to see sunny skies during the daytime, partly cloudy skies at night, no rainfall.
And just about the same temperatures, or?
Yes, the temperatures have, from what I'm seeing, will be more or less in the 90s, the mid-90s.
Pretty straightforward, and of course we still keep the forest fire notice out, and of course for people to stay hydrated.
That's right.
All right, well thank you so much for that update, Francisca.
You're welcome.
You have a great day today.
Thanks, same to you.
There you have it.
All right.
Hot and dry.
It's more of the same.
Yeah. Well,
Except for
less haze.
a few degrees less as well.
Yeah, of course. But we're going to keep things moving. There's a lot that we want to discuss this morning. And so we'll get to our motivation for today. And of course, that's our eye-opener, taken from dailyom.com. And it goes like this. A warrior perseveres in the face of adversity, stands up for their beliefs, and speaks in the service of those who cannot. When we feel pain, our first impulse is often to eradicate it with medication. This is an understandable response, but sometimes in our hurry to get rid of pain, we forget that it is the body's way of letting us know that it needs our attention. A headache can inform us that we're hungry or stressed, just as sore throat might be telling us that we need to rest our voice. If we override these messages instead of respond to them, we risk worsening our condition. In addition, we create a feeling of disconnectedness between our minds and our bodies. Physical pain is not the only kind of pain that lets us know our attention is needed. Emotional pain provides us with valuable information about the state of our psyche, letting us know that we have been affected by something and that we would do well to focus our awareness inward. The next time you feel pain, either physical or emotional, you might want to try listening to your own intuition about how to relieve your pain. Maybe taking a few deep breaths will put an end to that headache. Perhaps writing in your journal about your hurt feelings will ease your heart. Ultimately, the message of pain is all about healing.
I take this one from a figurative standpoint, whereby personally I won't focus on the physical aspect of pain, but more so on the emotional and perhaps spiritual aspects. When you find yourself being hurt by someone, or when you realize that you may have hurt someone, it is important for you to sit down, collect yourself, and understand where you went wrong or what went wrong that resulted in you feeling a certain kind of way. All right, and so being able to identify that source or the cause of that emotional distress would be the first step, and then being able to realize what you need to do to correct it, right? Either to apologize if it's a case where you are the person who has inflicted that pain, or either to learn to either forgive or move away from the source of what has caused you that affliction, that pain, right? And so when I look at the eye-opener today, it speaks on two things, which I found to be rather interesting, because I'm trying to see where they connect. The first line speaks about the perseverance of a warrior, right? And being able to speak up for others who may not have a voice to speak for themselves. But then it ends off by saying that the ultimate message of pain is about healing, right? And so my way of looking and connecting these two things would be to say, you know what? A warrior has to be able to endure pain. If we're talking physical or we're talking emotional or otherwise, you should be able to endure pain. But what allows you to rebound from that pain is how you're able to manage the situation, right? If it's your heart, if it's your hand, it's how you choose to deal with it going forward. So I think it's a very interesting eye-opener.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the first thought that comes to my mind is this is just such a great explanation of mental health and mental illness. Because, and I often use this example, you know, if you see me fall down right now, you'll naturally react and check if I'm okay. And it's kind of the same with mental health. Sometimes things happen to us, and it's like a fall, but everything you experience is internal, and it can be just something you can shake off and say, okay, I'll be better tomorrow. Maybe just a bit achy, or I could have a severe injury that requires more care. And I feel like it's the same thing. It's the same way we would address whatever physical injury we have, we need to address, or emotional injuries as well. And that's for me, I think, kind of the takeaway, especially in this time. There's a lot of different emotions that we're feeling. We're just, you know, we're going into our fourth week now, and we are aware of the fact that there will be an extension, even with lightened restrictions. It still is such a big change from what we're accustomed to. People are adjusting to many different things that they didn't experience before, and it can be from being able to provide basic needs, down to not being able to socialize or interact with loved ones. So I think that there's a lot of different emotions that we're feeling, and I think that this is a great eye-opener to remind us that we got to check in on ourselves.
Definitely.
You may be feeling a bit off. We all do. You know, it's not what we're used to. It is completely out of our comfort zone. It is necessary, but it is okay to not feel okay, and you need to find out what you need to do to make yourself feel better. And it goes, I love the idea of writing it. I mean, this is historic. There's no simpler way of saying it. None of us have ever experienced anything like this. And we'll be talking about this. You know, I joked earlier this year that 2020 is such a good year, you know. 50 years from now, when the kids are learning about the coronavirus pandemic, it'll be a great number to remember for quizzes and tests.
I am certain that while we all respect your opinion and your views on 2020,
I said
it
the
would be
number.
it would be met with mixed feelings, because a lot of people would have wanted for 2020 to be over and done with, given everything that has happened in the past 4 months.
But just in context, what I'm
Yeah,
saying is
yeah,
like the
I'm
number
kidding.
when you do have to remember it for a test later on. So
It's not
I think
difficult.
being able to use whether it's writing or talking to people, you know, like if it's your spouse, your family, whatever, don't just bottle up the feelings and think that everybody's coping fine, because we're not. We're all struggling. We're all trying to find a way to make ourselves feel normal. And it goes on varying levels. You may just have one off day, or you may just be in a rut. But you have to address them and acknowledge them, know it's okay, and try to find little things you can do to help yourself feel better.
Well, the thing is, it's being able to express oneself ultimately.
Yeah.
Because if you commit to writing down how you feel, that's one way of venting. And if you're an expressive person verbally and you're able to sit and share it,
Yeah.
then that's also another way of doing it. And let's not forget, introspection. Looking within also helps you to be able to see what the issues are and, you know, contextualize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the eye opener for this morning. And as we said, we have a lot to get into today. It is a Monday morning, and it's time for us to take a look at all that's happening in the news from last week into this week ahead. So we're going to shift gears into Eye on the News.
All right, so as you mentioned, there's a lot for us to get into. Most of it, if not all of it, is centered around our ongoing coverage and monitoring of the new coronavirus crisis that Belize and the rest of the world are facing. This morning at 10 o'clock, there will be a special sitting of the House of Representatives. And this will be special in a great many ways, considering the fact that, one, they will be tabling a motion for an extension of the state of emergency.
Yeah.
Special in another way, because this is a historic first, that not all of the representatives will be there for that meeting. And this is not a situation where you have certain days when you can absent yourself. This is a special setting, so to speak, in respect of the social distancing protocols.
Yeah.
So you will have the bare minimum, but just enough to have a quorum, which is necessary in this case, right? And so at 10 o'clock this morning, the Prime Minister of Belize is expected to put forward a motion requesting a 2-month extension of the state of emergency, albeit we are yet to understand fully what those measures will entail going forward. As you had alluded to earlier, it may include a relaxing, so to speak, of some of the strict measures that have been put in place that we've experienced over the past 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I know that for many of us, we breathed a collective sigh of relief yesterday, considering that it's one of those Sundays where we were at least able to go to the store and, you know, kind of function in some sense of normalcy, because the past 2 previous Sundays were rather heavy in terms of being locked in and not being able to move around.
Or just knowing that you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that takes place this morning at 10 o'clock. We will be there, albeit we'll be outside of the House of Representatives, because the press office will be providing a live feed that I believe will be carried in terms of broadcast. So you can tune in at 10 o'clock or just about for the video feed on Channel 5. You can also follow it on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
But it is anticipated that it will be a rather brief meeting this morning with the
There's agreement
sole and
already.
express purpose for this particular motion to be tabled and no other matters, right? So it should be an in and out kind of a situation. And we're hoping that we'd be able to, as the media, be able to get some questions answered thereafter. So that's the first thing we're looking at. The second piece of information regarding this entire COVID-19 situation has to do with the resumption of public transportation, Marlene. We know that a lot of people commute daily for work purposes or otherwise. In this case, we know that some of the government offices are reopening so that we have public officers who would be accessing public transportation and other persons who are now free to go back to work in private capacity would also be accessing public transportation. And so the Ministry of Transport has issued a release in terms of what the expected protocols ought to be going forward in respect of persons who are traveling on buses. And when I look at what they've set out, I think my biggest concern is enforcement. Because it's ideal for you to come up with a list of measures that you would want to see carried out. But when you're looking at a situation where you have a bus driver and a conductor, right? You would want to think that the onus would be on the conductor to be able to ensure that persons wash their hands or they hand sanitize, they come in wearing a mask and what have you. However, to be able to monitor that closely while you're in transit, because some people may feel like they need to take off the mask because it's too hot or congested or what have you. So that's one of the things that I look at in terms of enforcement.
Now, I was just going to say, before we talk about enforcement, we probably should outline what's required for people who
Well, it's a long list.
But one is that they have to wear a mask.
Yeah, which I alluded to, right? So yes, so you would have to wear a face mask that covers the mouth, particularly during the course of your travel, right? It says all transportation operators themselves are also required to do so. So the bus drivers as well as the conductors should also be wearing face masks, right? It also goes on to say
they have to wash their hands. Passengers have to wash their hands before they get on the bus. Right? They have to keep social distance on the bus.
Okay, so it says here, public transportation is now limited to seated passengers only. Bus operators, drivers shall not transport excess passengers, which speaks to standees, right? There will be absolutely no standees this time around. And in a sense, it kind of presents a challenge for them because bus drivers are notorious for picking up people along the way and cramming buses. So this will kind of limit whatever monies they'd be able to make from that run, but it's a necessary thing. And it has been an issue from the past, well before COVID-19, the issue of standees, right? So
well, there'll be less passengers wanting to access it. They talk about encouraging bus owners to provide additional buses for rush hour as well, so that you wouldn't have that level of overcrowding. But I would suspect, since there aren't as many people who are under the category of essential workers or approved businesses that are allowed to be open, it perhaps won't be as crowded. My question, though, Isani, is has anyone spoken to the bus owners? Because we know before the lockdown, when they weren't allowed to move, they were already expressing concerns that it was very cost prohibitive to keep on running with such few passengers. Has there been any update from them as to how sustainable it is for them to maintain the bus runs and even include additional bus runs?
Well, you would appreciate the fact that everything went into a lull insofar as public transportation when we went through the 2-week period of lockdown. So we have not been able to follow up with them, but it's a point that can be raised now that these rules have been set in place for the resumption of public transportation, right? So that's something definitely that we can look into. But you're right, prior to the 2-week period, there had been a cost-benefit analysis that was done by several of the independent bus operators, and they were saying that it's not feasible. If we were to put in place the exact measures that are recommended here or required here in terms of social distancing, in terms of seating and what have you, then you're looking at a considerably reduced number of passengers on board a bus. And is it worth it in terms of, for instance, a run from Belize City to Belmopan with only 10 persons, for argument's sake, versus what the norm would be? You're losing in terms of how much you're spending on fuel. Now, I don't know if the recent reduction in the cost of fuel will kind of help to offset. That's dependent, that's
maybe
relative.
That might give them a longer shelf life, but I think that one of the requests they'd made was for some sort of exemption or reduction in taxes for fuel for them. That didn't go anywhere. They never got any agreement for that. But it's hard sometimes to think beyond or before COVID, but this really takes us back to some of the bus issues that we saw at the end of last year, I believe, where they were kind of saying the same thing, and the response from government side was, well, you haven't been investing, and you know, there's a need for them to keep up their end of the bargain as well.
Yeah.
But under this context, it'll be interesting to see what they're saying now about the cost of travel.
Well, everything has been thrown into a tailspin, and we're trying to sift through what makes sense financially and so forth. And not only financially, but in the best interest of public health, right? So all of these things are being considered. The other thing, Marlene, if we pull up the infographic for where we are in terms of our fight against COVID-19 as a country, we are looking at 6 recovered victims of COVID-19. And so we're down to 10, right? We had a total of 18 cases. Regrettably, 2 persons succumbed to this deadly illness, and 6 persons have now been cleared of COVID-19, so we're at 10. And I think it's highly recommendable at this point, or commendable, should I say, take that back, it's highly commendable that we have been able to, notwithstanding certain constraints, been able to keep the number at 18. And with a view
well,
to
I was going to
reducing
say,
it altogether.
today makes 2 weeks since we have had no new reported cases of COVID-19. And that is very encouraging. The number of tests now are just a bit under 1,000 for the entire country. And now we're looking at 10 persons who still have the active virus at this time. 6 have recovered and 2 lost their lives to the COVID-19 disease. So, you know, I think what this means for a lot of people is that we feel like, I guess one of the ways to put it into context is that our efforts, as we spoke about earlier, have not been in vain. We're seeing, I mean, to not have that announcement of a new case, it really kind of gives people a sense of ease for now, but it doesn't mean we're out of the woods. I guess that's the challenge now. How do you not get people complacent because we are actually being able to reduce the spread?
Well, that is the primary reason why they're seeking an extension of the state of emergency, so that we don't get complacent, so that there are still specific strictures in place that ensures that we continue to do the right thing, right? To abide by those measures that are put there by the Ministry of Health and by the government as a whole. And so that's what we're looking at. Now, another one of the interesting points, and this falls within the discussion as well, is the fact that there are still persons who are being arrested and charged for violations, for infractions that are related to the state of emergency, right?
You know, I saw some of the reports from the police, and I guess the first question I have, and this is always my natural reaction, is the information clear enough? Are people understanding? Because when we were told that the lockdown, and unfortunately, because there are lawyers who handle this process, it's very much in legalese or in legal language. So when you say SI, I think it was 55, comes to an end on Saturday, we understand it because we've been following it, and a lot of people who have been following it understand that. And this is not to say that people don't have a responsibility to keep themselves informed. But I know that I had people who called and asked me, you know, does that mean, and it's educated people, does that mean that I can go and visit my family on Sunday, or I can do this on Sunday? And you kind of had to backtrack and explain to them, listen, it's just the end of that lockdown phase. The state of emergency continues. So my first question was, you know, was the information accessible to everyone? So having people go to the river to hang out on a Sunday, or at the sandbar to hang out on a Sunday, and we're talking over 20 people, shows that the message didn't get everywhere. I really would hope that they would find a simpler way to get this information out to people. I saw an excellent infographic with timelines. I can't remember where, I think it was Sweden, where people know what to expect. On this day, these people will be allowed to go back to work. On this day, such and such is going to happen. That will open up. It's this element of uncertainty that is a part of the course. But if we could give some kind of certainty to people, it'd be so much more helpful, rather than this waiting game of, you know, the announcement will be made later, the explanation will be made later. So that's my thought. But I won't say that there aren't people who are just rule breakers.
That's what I was about to say. You have to take into account that there are those of us who act in defiance of everything that is put in place knowingly, right? Because at that point, it doesn't matter how simple or basic or how direct the message is. When someone has decided that he or she will go out on a fishing trip, regardless of what the AG in this case says, then that person is acting in defiance. And you do have persons who have been arrested and charged as a result of taking those decisions, right? So it's just you know, a matter of looking at everything
and
holistically.
that's the perspective that I bring to the table. I think that there are people who are going to be chronic rule breakers, without a doubt. But I also think that we need to simplify the message sometimes to people, so that it's just very clear. Here's what you can do, can't do. You know, there's no need for all the other stuff. Just so we can all be on board. And of course, the police is keeping up their part. They're following through on the arrests. And what's interesting is that we keep on hearing of people who are associated with national security that are still being arrested for breaking the regulations of the state.
And they are the ones who are tasked with upholding. But in some cases, they are the ones that are also contributing to those numbers of arrests. Right? So that's basically it for the Eye on the News this morning in terms of the points that I wanted to cover. And so.
All right, so that's it for Eye on the News. All right, and we're going to get ready to move into our show for today. We are starting off with an update with the Director of Health Services, Dr. Marvin Manzanero. We're going to be talking about all things COVID related, where we are now, what are the next steps, and just moving forward, what can we expect? So that's going to be the first conversation for this morning.
Our second conversation will be with the Friends for Conservation and Development. As you all know, the issue of fires has been on the forefront of the newscast as well. And so our friends from FCD will be discussing all of these topics in that segment.
And, well, we did our segment for the ladies a few weeks ago about how to color your hair when you have grow out. We know that salons and spas are still closed, and some people got to take care of themselves, and there's some pretty unkempt men around the city right now. Isani, you're not one of them?
Thankfully, I've gotten out of that caveman phase.
But here's the thing, we understand. So we're going to give you some tips today. We're going to have Edmund Stain. Of course, they've been doing the annual back-to-school trimming drive for 10 years already, and so he's going to give us some tips on how to do it at home. Right?
All right, and then our kids' time for this Monday will be a discussion on vaccines and how they work.
That's right. So that's what we have in store for you this morning. We are going to go ahead and take a break, but before we do, we have our birthday shout out.
We are saying happy birthday to Charlotte Ferguson. Happy birthday, Charlotte.
Do enjoy. We hope it's a special one. We hope you have a lot of people who will be joining into your video happy birthday sing-along and, make the most of it. That's from all of us here at Channel 5 and Open Your Eyes. We're going to go ahead and take that break now, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
With over 100 years
Technology Center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.
And we're back. And we're getting ready to move into our first conversation for this morning. We are joined via Skype by Dr. Marvin Manzanero as we get the latest update on COVID-19 and all the work that's happening there. Good morning.
Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
How are you today?
A little bit better. I think we're gradually moving along, seeing how COVID-19 goes throughout the health systems, not just beyond the COVID-19 topic, that is.
Of course, of course. Are you able to rest a bit better now that we are officially at 2 weeks with no new cases?
Well, this weekend would have been one way you can say you rest, but every time we put in samples, I can't tell you that I rest until those results are out. And I think all those results that came out this weekend, I think we did close to 100 tests Saturday and Sunday. We are all negative, so that's a good thing.
So we're just at a little under 1,000 cases, tests that have been done in Belize. And I want to start there because I think that is perhaps the primary concern for people at this time. What happens in this phase? You've passed 2 weeks, you've done your contact tracing for the positive cases. You said you were going to go back and test secondary contacts. And then you also spoke about doing a sweep for testing. Can you explain to me what will be the new protocol for testing at this point since there are no new positives?
Well, today marks 2 weeks since we made that announcement. So that means this weekend that just went by would have been the 2 weeks that we last swabbed those identified cases. So the first thing is the contacts of those cases that were last identified now have gone 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so we will need to go back and swab them, the ones that were negative, and the ones that were positive as well, or later on in the week. But the ones that were negative to, in point of fact, determine that they still remain negative. So that's the tricky situation because you will note that most of our cases have been asymptomatic cases. So that's what we would need to go back and do. Mm-hmm. This weekend would have been the 2 weeks. So this week we start looking out for those that were initially negative to see whether in point of fact they are negative. That's one. Two, all healthcare workers that were exposed, I believe most of them have been swabbed. All of them are negative. The ones that are remaining from patient number 10, those are going to be completed this week. Last week, when we were discussing this with the epidemiology team, we were looking at who else do you go and take a sample from? Mm-hmm. Because we have done that with people who have influenza-like illnesses. We have done it with people who have SARS, which is severe respiratory. We have swabbed all of them. Mm-hmm. We have swabbed all those healthcare workers that were ill. So one of the considerations we are thinking is doing frontline personnel. I mean, people who are maybe in immigration, maybe tour guides, and do a randomization sampling because we won't be able to test all. Mm-hmm. Test people who perhaps have gastrointestinal infections and are showing up in the health system. Some patients outside of Belize have shown up with gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, or even people who just fever, do it at random. Okay. That's where we want to move this week because...
So we're officially moving into that phase of testing, or that's to come at a future date?
No. I think that's where we're going to go this week because we are not any flu-like illnesses. I know towards 1 week ago, people were saying, but you're not doing testing. But then the patients who had respiratory symptoms were simply just not showing up there. They're still not showing up in the health system. And the ones who are showing up and are being hospitalized, we are taking swabs from them and they're turning out negative.
How do you address those concerns? How do you address those concerns from the public when they are clamoring and urging the ministry to conduct more tests, but then your responses, as you've mentioned, is that those persons aren't showing up in the system? How do you ease those concerns?
Well, what I think is with communication is having constant communication and people understanding that there is a science behind everything that is being done. We are doing consultation with colleagues with the PAHO office, with CARFA and our fellow CMOs, the chief medical officers of each country. That communication is, I would say, on a constant and on a daily basis, because we are learning as we move along. It's not easy as well that people can just say this is what needs to happen. There needs to be a specific methodology. Even when you do randomization, understanding that you're not going to be able to test everybody, there's a process of how you will select those patients as you move along, or the potential patients, if you will. So it's trying to understand and trying to explain it to everybody so that they can appreciate where we are going, and ensuring that we are doing the right thing. Even the question we had with fellow colleagues at the CARFA level, English-speaking Caribbean countries, is how many tests do you actually need to do before you can declare that you don't have any real case in a given country. We had that question last week, and I don't know that we have an answer for that as yet.
So let me go back to something, and perhaps you can explain it a bit better. So the contact cases of the last confirmed cases, which is 2 weeks ago, it would be 14 days. However, the quarantine that is recommended is for 21 days, 3 weeks. So if we would be able to get to next week with no new confirmed cases, that would mean that those positive cases didn't transmit the virus to their close contacts. What does that mean for us then?
Yeah, well, 14 days is when you start doing the swab, but what we are noticing is that our patients are not necessarily recovering at day 14, which is why we extended the quarantine to 21 days. That's important that we remember that. In order for us to determine that this current outbreak, and I have to be very clear as to when I say this outbreak, right, because this is the current 18 cases. We will have to go 2 more weeks before we can consider, and that might change even, but that's what the science right now, 2 more weeks to make it for a total of 28 days without a case before you can consider this outbreak seems to have been over. And I'm saying this outbreak because eventually you're going to have, or you can have more waves. It's not going to go away. Even there was talks last week with colleagues to think that COVID-19 could potentially be a seasonal one, so that you can have Caribbean countries in a higher number towards the end of the calendar year, because that's when your flu season routinely picks up. That's October, November, December. So you'll have to prepare your health system for that eventually.
Doctor, I think that's a very critical point that we perhaps have to keep on mentioning, that this, even if we continue to see no new cases, this doesn't mean this is our end for COVID-19. But when you look at the risks that we do have in the country, let's use examples of people who are still moving across the border for the issue of trade. We still have exposure taking place outside the country on a regular basis. There are many who believe, Dr. Manzanera, that it's not that we don't have any new cases, it's just that we're not testing enough to find the positive ones. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, it could be the issue of asymptomatic carriers, and that can happen just about everywhere. But again, the morbidity, which is what you're concerned about, I mean, the people who are ill, and your mortality, those are the 2 main issues that you're trying to also contain. The further spread, and that you're not having people that are critically ill, and people who are just ill, then morbidity and mortality. We are not seeing them. Even though you do active finding for those, we are not seeing people who are critically ill inside a hospital. We are not seeing people requiring ventilation or having severe respiratory problems. So even if you may have asymptomatic carriers, and that would be the second ideal. The ideal is that you never have a case. Second ideal is that you may have asymptomatic carriers and nothing happens. I can't even talk now about immunity, because the newer evidence is suggesting that there might not be the development of immunity. It would seem that only some literature is talking about 2% only of people exposed develop immunity, which means that you can, for right now, seems that you will be able to get a new case of COVID-19, so that you're never really out of it, and that's a little bit scary when you think about it.
So what does that mean? A person who's been positive before can get reinfected? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, which means that that you don't develop immunity, which is one of the notions we always want. You want people to eventually, that's why you want to go for a vaccine, so that you develop levels of immunity. But people who have been infected, seems that they are getting reinfected, so that would mean that you don't develop immunity. We are considering also going into the month of May, perhaps doing antibody testing in our population. Do it in tandem with the PCR testing that we are doing, so that we can try to determine whether people have developed immunity in Belize.
We've received antibody tests?
No, we are looking at that for the month of May.
Okay. So we may potentially source some and start testing people to see if they've been exposed, because that's what the test does, right?
Yeah, once we have an approved test by FDA and WHO, then that's something that we can consider as a parallel study, if you will, because you won't be able to move away from PCR right now. So it would be antibody testing plus PCR. So and PCR, the antibody testing will require blood to be drawn. So it's two tests that you have to do.
Where are we in terms of procurements at this point in time for medical equipment and supplies relative to the fight against COVID-19? We're talking reagents, we're talking everything that we need in terms of continuing our battle.
Well, the next batch of ventilators that were due to come in, we hope that will arrive this week. And we are not using the traditional plane route. I believe those are coming by ship, taking a little bit longer to get here. The same thing with PPEs. We have not been able to get them in country as yet. We had a little bit of a delay in terms of the reagents and our swabs. We routinely would be sending them through Amerijet, but Amerijet didn't come during the week. That flight arrived until Saturday. Our swabs were apparently not on that flight. We did not get them. They were apparently confiscated. We're trying to determine what exactly happened to the swabs and trying to find alternative routes for getting it here. The x-rays that were also paid for weeks ago have also not gotten here, and that's the route would be by plane through the US. So we're trying to find alternative routes if we can go through the US. The reagents can get a bit tricky along with the swabs, and I think all Caribbean countries, as I understand from the meeting we had last week, are going through the same process. We have reactions, which is the tests that you are able to do now that was gotten through PAHO, but you still need your enzymes to do extraction of the virus, purification of the virus. So all countries are having difficulty in sourcing those key elements, but for now we would have to continue doing testing.
Is it
Dr.
of concern?
Can we simplify that just a bit? I want to be able to make sure I'm understanding right. So if you don't have swabs, and those are the Q-tip things that they use to collect the samples, right, the long ones, your reagents, which are your enzymes that you add to your kit to be able to determine your reading, what's our status in terms of how many tests we'll be able to effectively execute if we don't have these other tools? How many more tests can we do?
We had 2,500 reactions from PAHO. That's the amount of tests that you are able to do, provided you have everything else. We got 8 extraction enzyme kits on Saturday. I don't know how many were used through this weekend because it's not necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio. So today we'll go back, and every Monday we update our list to see what is needed. It's not that they are also not being procured. You will recall more than a month ago when we had a discussion, we had said we had procured 40 kits of 96 tests. Only 10 of those kits have arrived. 30, that even though they have been paid more than a month ago, have not arrived in Belize as yet.
But, and I think that's a valid point. I think you speak of what's being procured. In other words, you place an order to purchase. But what lands in country, what arrives for us to be able to use is a different story. So it takes me right back to what I'm saying. Even if you receive kits, but you don't have the swabs or the reagents, it means it will limit your capacity to test until these materials arrive. So have you done an analysis to see, okay, we can execute 500, 200, 1,000 more tests until we get this other equipment? What number are we looking at?
We do that update every Monday. So I mean, once we start running low, and we did say when the swabs were starting to run low, we have always been looking for other options. We were looking for options in Guatemala, Mexico, through the weekend, because they are not only used for COVID-19. You do swabs to test for other influenza viruses.
Yeah.
Use your enzymes for extraction, doing other PCR tests. So it's not only COVID-19. So even I think it would be wrong for me to also be able to say, okay, we are able to do 800 COVID-19 tests when you're using it for other things. Of course, the priority is still COVID-19, but if your patient is COVID-19 negative, then you still remember the parallel of looking for other viruses is important, because if you have H1N1, we know as well. So even if you're COVID-19 negative, those are being tested for something else. But we update that every month.
Okay, so can you give me an indicator?
We can start socializing.
I know you're being very cautious because the new numbers will be determined today, but can you give me what that number was last Monday?
I don't have it off the top of my head, Marlene, but I know we were very, very low in terms of extraction enzymes. Reaction kits, we were not having a problem. With swabs, we can go maybe 2-3 more weeks with the swabs we have. PAHO was very clear to us last week, Wednesday, to say that they don't have, and the two sources they have are not able to provide. One company that we had reached out to in a neighboring Central American country said that's off the market right now. We can't provide. So I don't have the numbers. I mean, we can provide that at the end of today to see how many more tests we can do and how many more swabs we can do.
Let me ask you this question then. Is it of concern in terms of the overall messaging? Because while the ministry has been at the forefront in terms of providing timely information, during those statements, either by yourself or by the Prime Minister, there's always talk of procurement of tests and swabs and what have you, but then we're having this difficulty of actually landing them in country, which in a sense kind of gives a sort of a false hope if you're hearing all these numbers, but the true picture is that they're not all getting here in a timely manner. How do you kind of change that narrative to something where it's not as, I don't know, as I'm looking for a word here, so that it's not as misleading, for want of a better word.
Well, this is the first time our swabs did not land. I mean, when they were expected to land, we're going to go and determine where they are today and whether we'll be able to get them from that source. So it's the first time that it has not landed. That's one. Two, it's the first time that the flight that was supposed to have brought it from earlier in the week, last week, did not arrive on the Wednesday. Then they told us on Friday, and then they finally said Saturday. So we had not had that experience. We have seen it happen to other countries. We are aware of the shortage everywhere, not just in Belize. But this is the first weekend that something that was scheduled to arrive did not arrive. The other ones, we're trying to find mechanisms to get it here. So those have not even taken off from where they're supposed to have taken off from, because we're trying to make sure it gets here. We don't want it to go through the experience that other countries have had where it gets plugged off somewhere else. So we're trying to avoid that. But it's the first time this has happened. So I think we also need to be very clear if by the end of the day we're able to say, okay, this is where it was taken from and this is why it was taken off from us, then we'll be able to say that. But it had not happened to us before.
Okay. Well, we look forward to those numbers because, we understand that testing will continue to be a critical part of understanding our situation. I want to shift away to another topic, if you'd allow me. One of the most fascinating things over the past few months has been watching all the new research coming out about the novel coronavirus, and this virus just keeps on, not changing, but we just keep on learning new ways of how it affects people and new age groups and new impacts on the body. I know a recent study is saying that young people are suffering from strokes as a result of, and we're talking 20, 30-year-olds, as a result of COVID-19. What do we know? And I know 18 is an impossibly small number to work with. But what do we know based on the experience in Belize so far? What has long been the information first coming out of China was it's elderly and it's high risk. But talk to us about what we can say about our COVID-19 data.
Well, one is that it has affected all age groups, both sexes, in similar fashion, 9 and 9. The two patients that unfortunately died had underlying conditions. That's one. Two is they were people, 2 males older than 55. And the vast amount of our patients did not actually require in-hospital stay or extensive medications in terms of their recovery.
So
16
of our 18 cases, we had 4 hospitalizations, 2 deaths, and 2 have recovered from the hospital care.
Yes, yes, and 6 have done the full recovery, at least having 2 negatives, and I believe that out of the 10 remaining, at least 5 of those should be recovered throughout the next couple of days, or by the Friday at least. So that will only leave you with 5 active cases. What we do know also is that our cases are not recovering in the 14-day time period. That's why we had extended the quarantine, so people are still having extended recovery times, which is what the literature is starting to describe now. And that's why it's important for us to be able to understand that this is not going to go away so easily, because imagine if you have 18 and you suddenly have 200 people, even if they're not ill, these 200 people that are in either self-isolation, wherever, or in a hospital setting, the long recovery process that you can have before you can be fully cleared. I think that's something we cannot shy away from. As I said, the vast amount of them were detected by swabbing them as initial contacts, not because they're ill. So that's important that our patients are not necessarily showing any sign or symptom there.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was really another question I wanted to ask. How many of our 18 cases were entirely asymptomatic? They had nothing, not even a sniffle.
I would say about half, if not more. I don't have the exact number, but I mean, understand even the person who was under quarantine, he was swabbed just because he arrived and was quarantined. We had people, I think it's more than half of them were not really showing any sign or symptom. They just showed up positive because they were swabbed in the mapping exercise. At least 50% of those 18 people.
And the rest that had mild symptoms, what were their most common symptoms?
A little bit of cough, runny nose, headache, not even fever as a primary reason, except the ones, of course, who were in the hospital. But the others just had very minor flu signs and symptoms. So a couple of them had lost their sense of smell and taste, as described in the literature as well.
Did any have the gastrointestinal symptoms that you spoke about?
One, as I can recall, one.
So I asked those questions because clearly one of the first messages that went out was to look for things like fever and shortness of breath. From what we've heard from some of the positive cases, they haven't had these symptoms. So does that now mean that perhaps when we go out and do expanded testing that we change, given our experience, again, with the very small number of 18, the symptoms that we ask people to look out for, to contact the Ministry of Health? So if I feel a loss of smell or taste or have unexplained diarrhea or vomiting, maybe then I contact Ministry of Health and say, well, do I need to get tested?
Well, we have tested people who have lost their sense of smell and taste over the last 2 weeks. That has happened. So that was taken in tandem with those who had respiratory symptoms. Those people were tested. and they were negative. The other thing in terms of our experience, because I know there was also a heavy call for having hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, doesn't seem to work. There's no medication that seems to work right now. So even though it's our interim guidelines, those interim guidelines started the new review process last week, Thursday, and all that section is simply just going to be taken off because it doesn't seem to work. Actually, a study, as we understand it, in Brazil had to be cut short because 7 out of 10 people died. So there is no specific medication right now, and we need to be aware of that. We need to be able to say that, and people need to be able to understand that there might be no specific medication if we are to fall progressively ill.
Yeah, yeah. And what does that mean for us in the long term? I mean, Dr. Manzanero, we're looking at the lift of the lockdown. There's an extension in the state of emergency, but we know that we keep on hearing of what is to come in terms of a relaxing of guidelines. What's your perspective on this? Do you think that we're perhaps moving towards increased movement too soon?
Well, as I understand the new SI that was passed out, it doesn't mean that people other than essential workers are going to move or should be moving. I think it's, I heard the word enforcement when we were having discussion before we started discussing the topic. It's more than enforcement, it's people's understanding of where we're going to go with COVID-19, because as I had said on Saturday, is even if there's a complete relaxation on a Sunday, if you have nothing to do on the street, then don't be out on the street. I mean, it doesn't mean that because everything is kind of opening up, I don't know that we will be able to understand that nothing will be the same. Regardless of where we go to work, the economic situation, everything else, nothing will be the same. And if we have no business on the street, then we don't need to be out on the street. So the relaxation, if you will, it has to be, if you recall how we went about scaling up till we got to a complete lockdown. Yeah. It's the same process that I think would follow, the scaling down, if you will. Now people are concerned about school, for example. When will school be open? That's the last thing on our list. But even so, I mean, this weekend you still have people going to the river. I just saw not people being arrested. You still have people doing big family barbecues and these kinds of things in their own surroundings. So we need to understand that we are not there yet, and I don't know when we'll be there fully. And even if we start to move towards that, well, I think it's a cultural situation to a certain extent. I have said before that I don't know that we are a disciplined enough society. For example, the use of masks, we need to really, you don't wear a mask just because it's trending or because you see everybody wearing it. You need to understand why the mask needs to be worn properly.
Are you now supporting, clearly, you know, we'd asked you before about masks and you said you used the WHO guidelines, which was that only sick people needed to use masks. But we've heard the Prime Minister, now the transport regulations are saying you must use a mask. So what does this mean for your position?
Well, the official PAHO note that we have still doesn't routinely recommend it, because one of the first things they say is the mask. In other countries that you have seen moved, it has been provided in certain aspects, but we need to safeguard first that the masks are available for healthcare workers. Yes. There can be a potential protection, yes, but again, that doesn't replace the other elements. That doesn't replace the social distancing, that doesn't replace the hand washing, the avoid touching of your face. The mask is perhaps the fifth mechanism, but it defeats the purpose if you're going to go to the river, for example, or have a barbecue, and you say, oh, I'm wearing a mask, I'm good. I would rather you not have the barbecue and forget the mask. So that's where I think we need to be very careful of ensuring that once it needs to be worn, that people are wearing it properly. So we're going to have to go back
a bit. Let's go back a bit to where you had mentioned earlier that there are cultural considerations to be made here, because when you look at our Belizean society, for instance, you're looking at persons who have large families, persons who find or are accustomed to certain kinds of recreation. Perhaps going to the river is something that families do on Sunday that has become what they would consider normal over these many years. And so the idea of the slightest relaxation of any laws or regulations for them means, okay, well, I could go back now to doing what I was doing before that was part of our family tradition or what have you. Now, how do you curb that against the fact that this new normal, quote unquote, prohibits us from doing these kinds of gatherings going forward?
Well, that's part of the discipline. Let's even use the example of a vaccine then, right? If you will, I mean, 12 years ago we were talking about H1N1. We didn't have the in-country capacity to make the diagnosis, and people surely died in 2009, 2010 because of H1N1. They still die. There's a vaccine and we still don't use it. The vast amount of Belizeans don't get the flu shot, even though you might do ads and stuff like that. So that's part of cultural norms, if you will. But and that's why I went back to saying we need to understand that there is not going to be the same norm. There is a new normal, and that may mean sacrificing going to the river this year, perhaps. Because when you talk about social distancing, all studies that you review are telling you it's going to be here at least for the next 2 years. So the next time you go to the store, are you going to have to wait your 6 feet in line? That's more than likely where it's going to be. That's going to be the new norm. So I think that's part of the messaging that we need to get across to everybody, that it's not going to be business as usual as long as you have COVID-19.
So I think that's part of what we hold on to, thinking that as we see no new cases, it means that at some point in time we'll say, okay, it's over, let's just go back to life as it was in February. But we hear your message, and this is one being reiterated across the world, that there is no going back to what was before, not right now and not anytime soon. Dr. Manzanero,
But it's the same rhetoric. You see the same people saying, oh, you're not testing enough, and you have them walking around asymptomatic. Okay, that's putting the onus on the Ministry of Health. But that same discussion is what we need to then say, okay, if Ministry of Health is not testing and they're all there asymptomatic, then when we're out on the street, you have to assume that all those people we are meeting are the asymptomatic ones. You don't have to wait for those to be identified. That's the people out there that we are complaining about.
Dr. Manzanero, we know that you work closely with the Oversight Committee, with the task force. Is there already a plan in place as to what happens if we detect another case? Or should I say when we detect another case?
Yeah, it depends, because it's not only before it gets to the oversight, we as health need to determine what we need to do, because it changes your testing and all your mapping exercise. First of all, it depends if you identify it where, if it's a new cluster. If it's not associated to the identified cases, then you kind of have a new ball game, if you will. If it's associated to clusters that we had identified, then that's some level of anticipation that could potentially happen. But as you identify a case out of the blue in Orange Walk, then you have to go and do a mapping exercise and find out what's going on there. So it really is going to depend on where you find them, when you find them, and what level of association they have to previously identified cases. If it's a new cluster, then it changes completely. And as I understand it, the Oversight Committee is, again, we're meeting on Wednesday. It would change. We give them an update every week to help guide decision making in that regard. That's what
Let me ask you my final question here, Doc. So the government has undertaken this massive exercise to mitigate in the first instance the outbreak of coronavirus in Belize. Eventually we will phase out of all of these measures. But what happens should there be a second wave? Do we see another economic shutdown? Do we see all these stringent measures coming back into force? Or is it going to be dealt with on a district level or a community level? What can we expect in the long run?
Can you have more lockdowns? Is perhaps the easier question. Yes, you can expect more lockdowns, phased in the same way we have done. Understand that we never transitioned to a stage 2 in our plan.
What
but
does that mean?
I mean, if you recall the plan that we had, where we said imported cases, second would have been localized community transmission, and third would have been extensive human-to-human inter-community transmission, which is a more ongoing transmission like our neighbor Mexico is undergoing right now. We never really transitioned to a phase 2 because we never really had sustained community transmission other than the 2 clusters that we identified. So the transition never really went there, but we took measures as if we were in stage 3, and which is commendable because countries who have gone through this are saying that's perhaps what we should have done very early versus trying to save the economy. Look at what, and again, countries make sovereign decisions. The US, for example, I don't think has gone through a full shutdown in most of, and again, they're in a full phase 3, if you will.
Yeah.
So can we eventually have lockdowns as we move along? Yeah, I mean, it can happen. Depends on how extensive your wave is. We might be better prepared as a community, hopefully not just the Ministry of Health, but it requires a community effort. If that is what needs to happen, then that's what needs to happen. That's why we need to start considering how we will go about doing our business under a new norm.
So what you're saying is, with the confirmation of new cases comes the potential of a shift back to stricter measures. So the future is a mix between limited movement to restricted movement to limited movement until there's a treatment or vaccine developed for COVID-19.
Yeah, and we're talking about the next 2 years, yes.
That's a very sobering thought. Dr. Manzaner, just, I know it's still early on, and you pointed out countries that have not engaged in lockdown. We see some of our Caribbean brothers and sisters still taking too long in having strict lockdowns, and they're seeing the impact as well. Just by your own measurement, should we feel secure or breathe a sigh of relief that we're at 2 weeks with no new cases? Or are we doing what we need to do right? Or is it just that there is this disease moving like a malignant tumor that we don't know about, just perhaps waiting to pop its head about again?
I think one is, you mentioned the Oversight Committee. I think the decisions that were taken at that level, we as a Ministry of Health can appreciate them. Yeah. Because we don't make decisions, we advise, and I think Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition who chair that have been very clear that they make the decisions from that first press conference, and I think those decisions have really helped wherever we are with our 18 cases. That's one. Two is, can we breathe a sigh of relief? I would say we can breathe a sigh of relief, but provided we have washed our hands, we have not touched our face, we are keeping our social distancing, yes. And even as you take in a breather, that's like you take a breather before you go out. It's because we are going as a society to face a new norm, if you will. So it's not letting our guards down. Wherever we are right now, it's ensuring we don't go to a second phase, and it's really going to be all contingent on what we do as a community, not necessarily what everybody, the government, Ministry of Health does. It's what we do individually that I think is going to be the hallmark of how successful we continue to be with COVID-19.
Well, we definitely, when you pay attention to what the experts say about the best way to move forward, it's early lockdown will help a lot in flattening the curve, as they say. We didn't really get our curve started that much here. But also, test. So that one is completely the Ministry of Health responsibility. Just to throw that out there and to look at where we see the future going with testing.
Yeah, I mean, we're not shying away from our responsibility. The testing is going to happen. Understand that we as a health system also are now considering how we will go about moving because there are other things happening. On Saturday, there was World Malaria Day. We can't shy away from the fact that if we do zero malaria cases this year, we are on the verge of having Belize declared a malaria eliminated country. This week is World Vaccination Week or Vaccination Week. You can't forget all those other vaccine preventable diseases that we have. So COVID-19, even though I think for now it seems to be contingent on what happens, of course, but there are many other health issues that we have to be dealing with on a regular and routine basis. MCH program is going to be started to be lifted up as well to see if we are not lagging behind with coverage for vaccines in those populations. So it is a lot of work. It's also how we go about doing our health work in a new norm with COVID-19 always going to be in the background.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us and providing all the information that you did. We appreciate you sharing your experience and insight, and of course, look forward to hearing more. Best of luck, Dr. Manzanero.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, doctor.
And there you have it. That was the latest update and extended conversation with the Director of Health Services, Dr. Marvin Manzanero, about COVID-19 in Belize. And as he clearly stated in the end, there's always other work that needs to take place. And in Belize, what seems to be in the forefront is, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing, we're seeing a large number of forest fires that are having a devastating effect on the Chiquibu. So we're going to be checking in with the Friends of Conservation and Development to talk to another Manzanero about what's happening there. So please stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.
and we're moving into our second conversation for today.
We are having a discussion this morning with the Executive Director of the Friends of Conservation and Development, the FCD, and we have with us virtually Rafael Manzanero. Good morning, Mr. Manzanero.
Hi, good morning, Isani. Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, Belize.
We are looking at the issue of wildfires this time of year. And of course, we know that you manage one of the largest, if not the largest area of landmass in the country, which is the Chiquibull Forest. What are we looking at in terms of being able to deal with either sporadic cases of fires or fires that are deliberately set along the border areas?
Yeah, in the case of the Chiquibull Forest, we are looking at particularly two main areas in that zone, which is the Chiquibull National Park and the Caracol Archaeological Reserve. What you could see in terms of this season, mindful of the dryness and the lack of humidity, what we are seeing has been a whole set of forest fires in the two areas that we are very sure we can confirm and validate that all of those fires have been done by Guatemalans. That has been really a very serious one for this year. We have never really seen so much fires in that landscape. We normally have been documenting them on the Guatemalan side, but what we are seeing is pretty much then the whole set of fumes, smoke, fire, areas destroyed all along that western border.
So there's satellite imagery available. You were telling me that there's actually an update done on a daily basis. So the concentration of fires are specifically along the borderline.
Yeah, well, in the Chiquibull and Caracol, yes. If we fly further north, or if we see more further north, like in Vaca is another 17 kilometers of the western border. In the Vaca Forest Reserve, there is a mixture of fires there. The mixture meaning that there's a whole set that also started from Guatemala. It came into Belizean territory. There are farmers and, of course, ranchers right along that adjacency line, and so that is also another set of fires that were built in and created there. But in the case of Vaca, we also have communities, Benqueviejo, Arenal, and so we also can see that some of those fires were started either deliberately or carelessly by some of the farmers in that particular zone.
Yeah. Now, that's part of what I wanted to discuss. Forest fires, very often people feel it's just something that happens in the dry time, the sun sets dry leaves on fire and that sort of thing. But based on the data that is available, isn't it the case that the majority of forest fires are actually caused by humans?
Yes. In the mountain pine ridge, it's normally, and other areas, normally there have been also sort of natural fires. In other words, lightning would hit a tree, and that's how it started. But what we are seeing more and more in the areas and looking at all of those points, we are very clear, and communities know that these were done by people who were basically just starting to burn their milpas, or either by just a matter of carelessness. In other words, if you have a butt of a cigarette and you throw it out there, that thing is going to catch fire just automatically, and it just becomes a wildfire in a couple of minutes. Because of the dryness, there's a lot of debris under the areas, a lot of leaves, and so anywhere, even in the villages, like in Sokots and Benque, all around the country, it's just so easy now to make a wildfire. I mean, these days, I mean, the temperatures are very high, so it just creates that environment. In the protected areas, I mean, you will consider then that along the western border, I mean, those were created by people who were either, burning their pasture lands,
Yeah.
the pasture lands along the western border, or either for agricultural fields. And so the people are not really building any fire lines. People are not really looking at the temperatures. People are not really watching over their field, and so a lot of it is really more a whole set of carelessness in terms of those conditions that now we are seeing all around the country.
Yeah. Now you raised the red flag last week that you were seeing. You said for the first time so many fires in the area that you're extremely concerned about whether or not it will reach an uncontrollable situation. Since you have raised the alarm about this issue, what's been the response, and what are your plans in terms of being able to try to control the fire situation?
I am glad that the Forest Department, through the Ministry of the Environment, the Department of the Environment, Forestry Department, in the case of the Vaca area, there is a plan that was outlined, just 2 days ago. There are people now at that area. There is heavy machinery. The idea is now to contain those fires in the Vaca area with the purpose of ensuring that that fire doesn't really cross beyond and jump into the Chiquibu National Park. So a lot of the actions as from yesterday and today and the rest of this week is just to ensure that those fires in the Vaca are controlled and contained. The CEO, that's Dr. Percival, informed that it's pretty much contained in the Vaca at this moment. We are heading up there shortly. The Forestry Department is already up there, and the idea is basically just to monitor those fires, that they are basically contained in that, and that it doesn't really spiral more south. If it spirals down south, then we would have another set of fires coming from the northern part into the Chiquibu Forest. So that's the plan for this particular zone.
Yeah.
What we would intend to do, because frankly, we don't really have the equipment at FCD, we don't have the manpower, we don't have even the expertise really to be able to deal with forest fires.
Yeah.
Because forest fires is quite a new element for us, because we had been observing them, but they were more like isolated fires before, although we have been reporting, Marlene, in your program about the agricultural fields. So, but those were really much more along that area. So we already knew that there were going to be fires, but this time it looks that it just basically became a widespread, jumping into several areas across the landscape.
Does this now force a shift in your mandate to be able to learn and build your capacity in dealing with fires, since this is now a new phenomenon that you have to deal with?
Yes, certainly, Imani. I mean, the idea on all environmental groups is once there's a threat, an environmental threat in this case, of course, we look at new interventions that we have to put in. For FCD, we believe that there are two main things, and as we were basically looking at our information of many years, we realized that in 2009 there was a policy and strategy and a strategy developed in terms of dealing with wildland fires. That was presented to the Forest Department. That's over 10 years ago. The plan outlined very clearly that public outreach and public education is critically important. The involvement of communities, that was really one of the key elements. And so there are two things to look at this. One is being able to prevent it, either through community participation processes, the communities to be informed on what to do in order really to prevent any of these fires from occurring. Yeah. And then, of course, really to combat it, once those become a wildfire. In the case of us, additionally, what really becomes critical because of the binational element with Guatemala.
Yeah, of course.
So in that respect, it is something also that needs to be added in as new interventions. Now, those interventions, even though we have been doing, partnerships with Guatemalans, even though they have been fighting fires on their own, also even much more bigger fires. In fact, they just got a helicopter from Honduras to be able to put out their fires in the Maya Biosphere Reserve until yesterday. And so they have the capabilities and some of the skill and the skills of being able to fight these big fires. But for us, we don't really have those abilities. I mean, to fight a jungle, fire is completely different from fighting one right nearby to a village. It's
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
because of the remoteness and all of that access, water sources, all of this. So we need really to look at it from, I would say, a much more generic and comprehensive plan. Part of that, and one of my recommendations is the development of a task force. The Forestry Department has started one, some time ago, but particularly looking at the northern part. If you recall, the Mennonites had some issues with Guatemalans a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's when a sort of a platform was developed, but for looking into the southern part of the Maya Mountains, in looking at those fires along the western border, that we need really to address it much more comprehensively with Guatemalans, because the source of the problem in terms of fires along that area is really more a transboundary one. It's coming from Guatemala.
Yeah.
So
And in fact, they have more people living in the area there than clearly in the Chiquibu. We don't have villages or anything where people are farming, at least legally, because we know the Guatemalans come over. But Ralph, let me interject there. So you spoke clearly of Guatemala getting resources from Honduras to help them to fight their fires. One of the things with forest fires is that it's exactly what you say. You can't have a team of men going in with hoses. That's not how you address a forest fire. Yeah. Have you had conversations with the forestry here about possibly using some of our government equipment, the helicopters, for example, or other aviation machines that can be used to maybe help in dousing the fire or to do something to prevent the spread?
Well, as how I mentioned, the Forest Department now has some heavy machinery in the Vaca, for example, and at this time. So that is basically to build a fire line in order to contain those fires. Now, helicopters are, it's not really any type of helicopter that can be able to do the dousing of water of forest. It's basically a special helicopter, and that's why not even Guatemalans would have this. Last year Guatemala got it from Mexico, and this year they got it from Honduras. So it's really a sort of a special equipment that is used.
Yeah.
But I think as we start really to advance and see more of the drought, because the drought also has to do is basically creating that environment now for more forest fires to occur. And so if we start really to project into the future, we do see that drought, dry years, and less humidity is basically appearing, right there as from last year, and this year, and also next year. Yeah. So we need really to start to look at the configuration of other interventions. Either we will need really to get more partners together, either be able to prevent it more from across the borders, but it has to be a more comprehensive plan. And I think this is going to be now the time, particularly Marlene and Isani, when now the people are really more concerned about their health issues, because it's no longer only a matter of biodiversity as how we have been talking about over the years. Now people are really getting now connected to this matter because of their health. Here in Cayo, all around the country, you are hearing a lot of people getting worried, concerned. People are unable to sleep. So health is now really coming more as a key thematic of interest in terms of aligning that to forest fires.
I couldn't imagine. We had one mildly smoky day here from the winds coming in from Honduras, and it was uncomfortable, to say the least. But Raf, this is why I think getting a handle on the situation is important, It's hard to think of anything beyond the pandemic that we're currently facing, but it was just a few months ago that we saw the biggest wildfire in history in Australia that just completely polluted air far beyond that continent itself. So it's not impossible, and they were facing the same thing, unprecedented dry seasons that did not seen before. And they are far better resourced. So I'm saying with knowing the history of the Amazon fire, the Australian fire, should we perhaps act as cautiously as possible with the fires that we're seeing in the Chickasaw?
Yeah, of course, and I think we should not really have been in a position of basically reacting. I think that's why the plans were there quite some years ago. In terms of really being much more proactive in this level. I can say, Marlene, that in fact just about 2 weeks ago, we took out a study because we are funded by PACT and thanks to PACT for their assistance. And one of the markers and output that we needed to demonstrate is if the efforts on the ground is basically paying off. The study that we just concluded about 2 weeks ago, it demonstrated that reclaiming the land in the Chickasaw was about 10.5% in terms of the forest returning back. I can tell you that when you fly over these areas now, goodness, all of that 10% and is basically gone.
Wow.
So if you go over the Vaca, like what we did on Wednesday of last week, if you fly over, it's impossible to imagine how this thing really occurred and what we now have to do. It was really dramatic.
Yeah.
It's just.
I keep on hearing you say that, Raf. Can you maybe just help us quantify? You say you've seen fires before. If you want to use percentages or even number of fires, what's the difference between what you're accustomed to seeing versus what you're seeing now? Help us understand.
Yeah, I think in the Chickasaw and the Caracol, there were. There have been like fires before because of the agricultural fields, but alone in the Vaca in the Vaca area, just over a week ago there were 28 hotspots, and 28 hotspots means basically large areas. These are not really looking at the small little fumes coming out. If we start to look at the fumes coming out, it would just become increasingly much more higher, over 200 or so. If we look in the Caracol had 7 of the key hotspot areas, and in the Chickasaw there were 15 hotspot areas. Now these hotspot areas are quite large areas. In other words, like tomorrow we are going to Chickasaw only to assess back again, and we are carrying a couple of technicians to give us a better idea and an assessment. But in the Chickasaw, for the first time, we see those fires jumping over the main road, Cebada, and big trees are dropping. I did send a video up to your channel there where you can see how these broadleaf trees are basically dropping. So it means that the intensity of those fires and the extension that is really covering, it's highly dramatic.
So I hear you saying it's an increase in numbers, it's an increase in intensity, and it's also in areas that you don't normally see it. All of these.
Yes, exactly.
What percentage would you say in terms of the numbers of fires are you seeing this year versus years in the past? What's the increase?
I would say that it's like in the Chickasaw, we are seeing much more than 10 times more than what originally it has been. The Vaca is the most hit right now. Vaca is amazingly, I don't know. I mean, it's I don't know if it's 20 times more than what originally we have seen before. The problem on this also, Marlene, is that what we are observing, you see the fires on areas like on pasture lands, but then you see other fumes coming out from afar into other areas. In other words, like in the Chickasaw, if we see a fire right along the 1 kilometer, but then you see other fumes appearing behind those mountains. In other words, you are seeing fumes up to 2 to 3 kilometers within national territory. So those fumes, if it doesn't rain, then certainly those ones are going to continue on just progressively just becoming bigger fires. I mean, the remoteness in these areas and southern Chiquibul, I mean, even though it's the biggest water reserve in this country,
Yes.
because the headwaters are there, but a lot of the water is basically underground. And so if you go there and you try really to get water to access it, it's not really that easy really to be able to just be able to pump water or to be able to get water.
Yeah.
So and so it's a combination of things. I would say that and so our main bet, our best bet, is basically to prevent it. And to prevent it means that Guatemala also has to be aboard at this. And that's where I basically mentioned that in my recommendations, it would be critically important for Belize as a country to be able to make an exchange of note to the government in Guatemala. Because it is not basically, what we're observing is not really the same typical things of over the years. This thing is really much more a disparity of those number of fires occurring, and that includes also the Caracol, and it includes the Vaca. For the first time also, we saw an increase of fires in the Columbia River Forest Reserve, which is south. I think the Maya Leaders Alliance have been able to make a shout also at it that there's more incursions into their area. The Columbia River, we saw a big fire there from the area of El Carrizal from Guatemala. And so we are seeing all along that western border a whole disparity of forest fires.
This is areas managed by Yakshe Conservation Trust, correct?
In the area of Columbia River, no, there's no co-manager. This is basically the forest department. I know the Maya Leaders Alliance have been, trying to get also assistance from the community leaders in terms of seeing what really to do with that forest. But that's technically only the forest department as far as I know.
Okay.
Now looking at, and I appreciate you acknowledging first the human impact that can happen, which is just the health repercussions of wildfires with the air pollution. But there's also impact to biodiversity. I mean, you have lots of wildlife that lives in that area. You also know, I mean, you're talking about broadleaf trees, but these are trees that take many, many, many years to grow into full maturity and to provide the right shelter for these biodiversity. Talk to us about that type of impact and how that concerns you for the conservation efforts.
Yeah, there are three main components that are highly impacted from the conditions of the fires today. And biodiversity is one of those. The climate change is the other one, and then, of course, the health issues. But in terms of biodiversity, we have not been able to quantify, and I don't think anyone has been able to quantify, at least here in Belize, in terms of the effects that a fire has on wild animals and creatures out there in the jungles. Once a tree drops, then it carries many other trees. There are perimeters of a coverage that is basically impacted as a result of that. There's a whole open, areas and gaps that are open in the forest whenever a fire is passing through. What happens when those trees drop and they collapse is basically now you see a secondary forest coming up. So that's where we call it huamiles that are created under the forest. So that changes the whole sort of the ecosystem there. The animals that are living there are displaced. They have to find somewhere else to go. Many of them, the small ones that are unable to fly, like the snakes that are only able to crawl. All of these basically animals, they just are smoked and they die right there in these forest fires. There's anecdotal information of people under the forest that you would see, like deer, dead deer, other animals that are unable then really to escape the wildfires. So there's a lot of impact. The nests of birds, you can hear the animals crying, for example, the howler monkeys. So these animals, once they're encircled by a fire, of course, they are just going to collapse and they're going to die. So a lot of the impacts, we cannot, it's very hard really for us to quantify. What's the life of an animal? How do you put a price? This kind of things. So it's really.
But we do know, I think what you're saying though is that it is happening and it does have the potential to happen. And while we don't necessarily put a monetary value on our wildlife, they do hold great importance to us as Belizeans. you know, you talk about our howler monkey crying, and I feel that one instantaneously, or the beautiful scarlet macaws that you care for and monitor in the Chiquibull. You know, those all of these other animals are important to us, whether or not we can put a price tag on them. So, you know, Raphael, I will always appreciate the fact that you ensure that even though Chiquibull is far removed from our everyday reality, you keep us aware of what's happening. What are the critical next steps that have to be taken for us to address this situation? One, you said you're really hoping Belize will send a formal note to Guatemala to have them do their part on their side of the border with the forest fires. What else?
Yeah, the other interventions that we have that we are recommending is we do need to create that task force of technical people ready to come up with an action plan. We ourselves will have really to get more of the capabilities and the training and the equipment to have it there and be able to use it whenever this kind of spates of fire occur. We need really to promulgate and to increase a full community outreach program and campaign. You know, messages through the radio, you know, messages through the TV stations. All of this will be critically important. We also need really to apply the law, application of the rule. We have basically sent, you know, patrols out there into the Chiquibull. The directive is we will detain anyone that is captured out there, and hopefully then they would be prosecuted in court. And that's not only in the case of Guatemalans, you know, that is not only for Guatemalan, because the law applies to anyone. We have been discussing with the Forest Department that wherever we have known that there are people who have put fires, for example, in Vaca, then they need to be prosecuted. The only way that people are going to understand these things, that they will be able to be much more respectful of the law, is basically to apply it. And so we feel that it has to be done. If not, you know, people take it for granted that, you know, the fires, you can just come in and lit it and it's gone and then you just go home. You know, that's not the way how these things operate. You know, many people are suffering biodiversity, climate change. You know, climate, how much pumping of gas emissions are going there every day. In Guatemala, they already have come up with an estimate in the Maya Biosphere Reserve. So here we are seeing a lot of those fumes going up. So I feel that the impact, and in terms of the economy, you know, that's the other thing. You know, if we start to quantify what really are the losses, then I think a person has to be much more sensitized and much more aware that the impact that they are doing only by one lit of a fire by one individual, it really is creating a havoc in, and now obviously people are able to feel it, people are able to sense it, people are able to really recognize that it is really a critical, you know, matter. And so the application of law is also important. So I think that those recommendations are at best at this point in time. We can only do so much, and we have always said that, Marlene, as an NGO, we can recommend, we can be able to do certain things, but the state also have to take that level of responsibility and be able also to do the application of the rule, and of course be able to bring in other counterparts. You know, FCD is here basically to assist. The coverage that we are doing, you know, through the aerial reconnaissance demonstrated that it is not only isolated to the Chiquibull. This area now has increased in terms of the effects. Columbia River, the Caracol is getting a big hit out of forest fires, you know, today. So, and Vaca, of course, also likewise.
So, you know, there was a statutory instrument passed last week increasing the regulations for intentionally setting fires, and so enforcement is going to be a crucial part of this. But for people who just may be unaware of what they're doing, what type of behaviors, if you are in these areas, do you just want to stay away from?
Well, I mean, for right now, in the Vaca, I mean, many of these particular areas are closed off right now from any level of visitation. So basically no one is allowed to go into the Chiquibull, into the Mountain Pine Ridge, unless you are working there, but not really for recreational opportunities. The Vaca farmers are still going there. The Vaca Plateau, there's farmers from Arenal, Benqueviejo, Socots. But the point here is that the fires that were created were done a couple of days ago. If anyone is hoping really to put any more burns in terms of for their farmings, they need to ensure that they get a proper permit, which for now is not granted.
Yeah.
Forestry Department or the Ministry of Agriculture providing any permits for burning right now. So they need really to uphold the regulations and the law. They need to obey the rules. If anyone is caught, I think that they need to understand that they can end up paying their $5,000 and or their 2 months of imprisonment. And I certainly hope that really, someone can be caught, because that's how people are going to really see that this thing is really truly into effect. That's quite a remark that you probably shouldn't say, but the only way that we have seen, Marlene, is that people learn only by really
when there's enforcement.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we do appreciate you sounding the alarm for us once again, and we hope that we see some progress in terms of people not going out and creating any fire, and that a resolution is made in terms of what's happening on the Guatemalan side, clearly already impacting Belize. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Rafael.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, thanks so much. You guys have a nice day. Thank you.
Best of luck and stay safe.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. The same. Take care. Bye.
All right. There you have it, the situation of forest fires in the Chiquibul. Clearly, it's a critical situation, and we do appreciate Friends for Conservation and Development keeping us updated as to what is happening there. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, well, this is going to be a fun one, I guess. If you're at home and you have not been able to see a barber in the past few weeks, well, we can only imagine what you look like. But we're going to help you. We have someone who's going to guide us through an at-home haircut for men. That's coming up after the break, so please stay tuned.
COVID-19 is an infectious disease.
juguetes, otras manos y caras. Los gérmenes enferman a la gente y por eso es muy importante lavarse las manos. Es importante lavarse las manos, así que sigue estos pasos para hacerlo bien.
Primero.
Encienda la llave del agua y humedezca las manos.
Segundo.
Use jabón en las manos y frote.
Tercero.
Enjuague las manos por completo.
Cuarto.
Ahora que sus manos están limpias, use una toalla de papel para tocar y apagar el agua.
Quinto.
Seque las manos con una toalla de papel.
¡Hooray!
Sigue estos pasos cada vez y mantendrás alejados los gérmenes. Así que recuerda, la mejor manera de combatir los gérmenes es lavarse las manos.
And we're back, and we are moving into our next conversation for today. Just in case you're wondering, Isani had to leave because he's on duty to cover today's House meeting, so he's on his way to the West. But I'm continuing the rest of the show, and this is going to be a very important segment for people at home who want to cut their hair. Edmund Stain is with us. Of course, we all know Edmund from the annual Back to School Trimming Drive. And so for 10 years, he's been doing a haircut. So he's going to try to teach the guys at home something new. Good morning.
Good morning, Marlene.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I mean, it's the first time I'm seeing myself like this, but, you know, I'm surviving.
You know, I think I've heard so many stories of people concerned about not being able to go to the salon or to the barber, and it seems to be a collective experience right now. But
a lot of people say that they should have barbers as essential workers.
But you know, it's across the globe, you know. In the United States, for example, they said at one point all the trimming tools and hair dyes were flying off the shelf. So it's not just us. But let's talk about it. You know, you started your experience with cutting hair as a way of getting kids ready for school. And so it seems like something very difficult, but you guys have been pulling it off. So how easy is this for someone to do at home who's never done it?
It's not too difficult. I mean, I won't by any means try to pretend like I'm an expert at trimming or anything. I mean, I cut hair basically. There's some amazing guys in Belize that can trim. I mean, I can think about Brian and my little brother Kimber, you know, some of these guys from Farid's barbershop. You know, they have, there was a professional barber that came to our show once. Mm-hmm. He's a professional. I mean, these guys are top of the line barbers. But the tips I'm going to share today will really guide the guys that are like me, that are novices, and just want to get into the quarantine time, you know. We use basic stuff. I mean, we don't have to go high-tech into any expensive equipment. You know, I can remember as a kid when, just to give you a little picture of what used to happen. My grandparents had 18 kids, and we used to live in one yard, basically all of us. And there used to be this one Auntie Hilla. She went with her scissors and her comb, and everybody lined up to get trimmed. And that was for us to go back to school back then, you know. And that was like basically, we were excited to get our hair cut. We didn't worry about a markup or anything, you know.
Oh, wow. So that's what we're doing today. We're doing a scissors and comb haircut?
Well, I'm just demonstrating.
Oh, okay.
So now, I mean, if you have a beard like mine that is growing, you can basically use your scissors and your comb to kind of get it combed out, and you can level your beard, you know, using this device. I mean, it's simple. You don't have to. It's not expensive. I mean, basically.
Those are two items that most people would have at home.
Definitely. Most people have scissors and comb. You know, you can take your beard and comb it out, and you can really level it out using this, you know, as a piece of equipment. Some people use it to cut their hair. You know, I wouldn't do it personally. I would cut somebody else's hair in case I don't have a machine. Yeah. Because you have to get on top of it and make sure that it's level.
Yeah.
They're different. Yeah, sorry?
No, I'm just listening in awe. But because your comb and scissors for the beard makes so much sense. It's for people who are growing a beard, they relied on their barber to kind of keep it nice and groomed. But this is one way to keep it groomed.
Yeah, well, for me, I had a smaller beard. So when it caused it to grow, there's like a thick black line where the beard was at first, and then the others is trying to grow out.
Yeah.
So it looks bad. So you have to like really get it combed out to where, and just take snips at it and just keep it right in line with the comb.
Yeah.
And that's level out your beard for you really, really nicely. So that's like one way you can do it. Please make sure you have a brush or something you can use to kind of smooth it out afterwards. That's an example of how you can keep your beard, kind of level.
Yeah, because it grows unevenly too. Like some areas grow faster than others.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that happens, especially with us. I'm a Creole guy. So my hair grows all over the place. We have to like kind of.
And some of the curls might be more dense in some areas than others.
Yeah,
I know.
We have the curly hair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the next items that we can use really is just a basic shaver.
Okay.
These are the real cheap ones. These you could get them for $1 at the store.
Okay.
They work perfectly. Some people can afford to buy shaving cream. These are some of the cheaper types. These are like $5 for the pop. There's some expensiver types. You use like the Gillette, other brands that are much more. I think it's more effective.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a big budget, like a lot of people don't right now, especially because of the COVID-19, you can go with the shaving cream. Or what I do, I don't even use shaving cream when I use razors. I use a bar of soap. You just take the bar of soap and you lather it on your face, and trust me, this gives you a really sharp edge. A really sharp edge, and it really works effectively. I mean, this is better because it has a handle on it, and it's easier to use than the traditional razor blades. I mean, I can use razor blades because I've practiced it over time, but I wouldn't encourage somebody that's just starting out to use a razor blade. I mean, if you don't have the technique covered. I mean,
So you said the regular disposable razor will give you a sharper edge and is easier to control if you want to define the beard.
It's much easier to control, and it gives you a smooth edge. I mean, if you look at this, I have a bar of soap in my hand. If I would lather this area right here, right, just lather it with the normal soap, guys. This is stuff that you have at home, right? So you don't have to really worry about running to the store, using your benefits money or anything to try to get groomed. These are some of the items that you would buy anyways, so you can do this, and the line would basically show as you clean it off. If you notice, you see that the line will basically come, and it shows with the soap, but that's where your hair is. So you can basically see how clean this is getting, like really quickly. If you notice.
Okay.
And it's getting down. And you can see the line being created. This is what they go for these days. They go for the straight edge, right?
Yeah.
If you notice, it's getting down. And it's getting really smooth. And this is very cheap. This is not expensive at all. Very easy to do because the handlebars on the razor gives you better control. Right? If I wanted to, I could switch this up and use the traditional razor blade that we use at the stores in Belize. In other countries, like when I've traveled, I've noticed that they don't use these razor blades simply. They use it like with a handlebar on it.
Yeah.
They use a hot towel to kind of get it cleaned up.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to know how to maneuver it. You kind of flex it, and you can just shave your face with it, right?
I don't know. That doesn't look like anything somebody who's inexperienced should try.
You can't end up cutting your face if you.
Of course.
So I'm kind of going towards
the disposable. Okay.
Shaver, right?
We'll stick with the disposable recommendation.
Yeah, and it's really clean.
All right, so we have two really great tips there. One, to just kind of keep the beard even, you use a comb and a scissors to kind of keep it even throughout.
If you notice how it gives you this straight line,
yeah.
gives you a straight line, and that's what the guys go for nowadays. Everybody wants to have the straight, clean contour line.
Yeah.
You know, basically.
And you did that with a disposable razor and a bar of soap. So even
Yeah,
if people were thinking it's not possible, you just showed us that it is.
It is. I mean, and you could do your entire hairline with it. You know, it's not even that difficult. Of course, if you have additional equipment, if you have like, these are the cheaper version. These are Conaires. You can find these at the store for $35.
Okay.
Expensive. I have the mid-range clippers here. These are Wall Precision versions. These here, you go like $60, you know, for these at the store, and these work perfectly. These are exactly what we use for the back-to-school drive every time. You know.
All right. So let's get into the haircut portion then. So.
Yeah.
That's where people are, everybody's growing a little bit more hair than they're used to. And they want to just look presentable, even if that's the case. And it's hot.
What I have here is a Wall Magic Clip. This was good to me, right? So these are the 5-star clippers. They're really silent, and then since 2018 they came up with the cordless version of them.
Okay.
But if you do have them, then that's very good, because it's very good clippers. The weight of it and the heavy duty grade of it tells you how good it works. We use it for the trimming drive, and it didn't run hot after cutting over 50 years. Yeah, it was really put to the test at that point in time. If you have Hispanic hair, you kind of have to use the bigger guides when you want to cut.
Okay.
For guys like me, like I said, I'm a Creole guy. My hair grows my hair grain basically grows in one direction. So it's to the front, to the side, to the back, and again to the other side, and it's straight down along the contour grains.
So you're lucky.
Good.
You're lucky because you kind of have a guide already as to how to go.
Yeah, it's fairly easy. For example, you take the machine and you cut directly frontwards, right? You cut directly frontwards, and it's very, very easy to get the hair off.
Yeah.
And it comes right off as long as you have the proper guide in place to take it to the height that you want to. This is not hard to do, guys. This is, you just follow, you take the clipper, you hold it upwards, facing out from you, and you put it up on the top of the ball of your head, and you bring it directly frontwards.
How do you not get the bald spots? Because I think that's the part that people are most fearful of, that they just dip too low, and it happens, especially if you're not experienced.
It's very tricky. I think I cut my hair like 3 or 4 times by myself first before actually learning how my hair grows. There's this spot on the top of the hair that has like a spiral.
Yeah, the little center.
You cut the hair on the wrong direction in whichever case, it gets under the grain, and it actually causes a dollar coin to come on the top of it. It's really funny.
Okay, so your tip to that is find the center, like the little circle area. And then kind of, what do you do? Do you feel your hair to see which way it grows, or do you use a mirror? How do you?
If you're doing it by yourself, which I'm doing right now, you have to really take your hand and feel for that little contour you have here. And whenever you feel it, you have to take the grain, and whichever way you feel the grain going, you take it either downwards, forward, or the sides, and you take it around and around until your hair gets to the height that makes you really comfortable.
Okay.
It's just like you take your hand to the top and you put the clipper in front of your hand.
Yeah.
Right? You just bring the hair down, and it's all coming off to the height that you want it to. Based on the guide. I mean, you could take this to a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, whichever you want to take.
What are you using right now?
This is a number 2, but I actually filed it down a bit, so it's like midway between number 1 and number 2.
Okay.
So it's a height that I really like because sorry, I'm eating up my hair. It literally brings out the waves, and you know, like, us as dark men, we like to have our waves showing. It's like a fashion statement, right?
So a 1 would take you down to like a crew cut style.
Yeah, it'd be like a cleaner cut, closer to what the police officers, Coast Guard officers find acceptable.
And you're at a 1, between a 1 and a 2, you said.
Yeah, because I literally took a number 2 and I filed it down. Like I filed it down to kind of give me the height that I want to. I mean, that's me experimenting. I'm not gonna advise anybody to go and do that. But you know, it gives me the height that I want. I feel comfortable with. I really cut my hair because of the heat. Like the heat drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I have to like keep it down. I was just about to actually cut my hair when I got the call from Channel 5 to come and assist with this. So I said, you know what, I'm going to wait.
So you left it even longer just for us. Well, we're grateful because it was a very hot weekend too. You probably preferred it cut.
It was excruciating. Well, Channel 5 has been, I mean, it's been good to us from ever since we've started. And it's the least I can do to try to give back. I know it's a really tough time for a lot of people right now, especially during this COVID-19 outbreak. I mean, we have been doing a lot of work to plow into our organization. We have seen an extreme demand for the pantry. You know, so far a lot of people are trying to find food. So, you know, keeping yourselves clean, keeping yourself with a little bit of confidence right now is very important moving forward.
Yeah. And we appreciate the tips so far. So, I mean, you've really shared a lot. One of the first things I think maybe nobody thought of was to figure out how your hair grows. If you're going to use the clipper, how it grows so you don't go in the wrong direction and end up with the shilling or the dollar, or some people have the 50 cents.
You can also use the clipper to get yourself marked up. I mean, you have to use the razor. If you don't have a razor, you don't have a razor, you're out of cash, the stores are closed, it's nighttime or whatever, it's quarantine, or it's a Sunday when everything is closed down. You can use machines to actually give yourself a good markup. You know, and some of these are very sharp, so it works fine.
So this is kind of just to give you one even cut all around, which is all you encourage people to do at this point. I don't know if you want to move towards fades, or that's too complex for people to try at home on their own.
I have some friends that can give themselves a fade. I mean, a lot of my friends have the skills to do that. I can give myself a taper.
Okay.
But it gets kind of tricky. So after mirrors, and it's very, you know, it's kind of scientific. So I just stick to the regular cut.
Yeah.
I try to do more, but usually if I have a conference or something important coming up by way of the work that I do, then of course I try to clean up because I have to presentable.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that's basically it. If it's in case somebody is not that skilled, it's the first time they're trying it, stick to the basics. The basics always work. Like I said, the basic stuff can help you and get you through the process just as effective as anything else.
Yeah.
The razor blades can work, or just the shavers. I mean, there's some expensive ones. There are some cheap ones. The cheap ones are as effective. So I recommend using them.
All right. So you said for your hair, curly hair, 1 or 2 works good. If you have straight hair, you suggest using a wider comb.
Yeah, I mean, if you have higher hair, because for us, you know, we're gonna use the scissors if our hair gets higher because it gets really tangled and the machines can't really work. You know what I mean? The people with loose hair, like some of the Hispanic guys, the East Indian guys, they want to use like a number 3, number 4 clip.
Okay.
You know, to cut the tops off. And most of these guys nowadays use the shear off end. So maybe they use the number 1 to kind of use it in opposite direction. So they get a nice fade going around.
Okay.
First, and then you kind of phase it in with the higher braids so that the hairline doesn't show clearly. It's like faded in. It's not that difficult to do. I mean, there's a lot of these things are on YouTube. You can just go and see exactly how it's done and practice it. This is the perfect time to practice it because you may be home for a little time. So if anything goes wrong,
you have enough time for your mistakes to grow out.
You can grow out of your mistakes, right? Perfect.
All right. Any final tips, Edmond?
Well, yeah. I mean, I just want to ask, you know, you guys can use like an alcohol-based antiseptic or just to clean yourself up whenever you're finished. What I usually do is to go and take a shower. So I wash my face using that, and then afterwards I use just an alcohol, and I take and I kind of I mean, another tip that I wanted to share. These things for guys like me, don't use shavers under the chin. If you use shavers under the chin, it causes razor bumps to come.
Yeah.
So what I use under the chin is just the machines, right? So you gotta be very careful. If you're gonna use it, then try to have enough shaving cream or use enough soap, like a whole lot of soap, so that it doesn't irritate it. I find that my hair, and not only mine, but other guys that have hair like mine, it gets really irritated if you try to use a razor blade under there, and it brings razor bumps.
Yeah.
Nobody likes razor bumps, so I advise to use the machine under the chin to kind of get cleaned up doing that, and it works effectively, and it doesn't give any razor bump. So I always remember after every trim, every shave, you use some type of antiseptic. Alcohol works perfectly. You use that and you kind of get it to turn up. If you feel heat developing anywhere along, you use powder on that, and the powder kind of keeps it cool.
Okay.
And that kind of eliminates any adverse effects.
All right. So there we have it. Some of the tips on how to do your at-home styling for men.
Yeah.
Very quick tips and stuff that I, like I said, from keeping the beard groomed with scissors and a comb, using a regular disposable razor and soap if you don't have anything else. And of course, just how to guide yourself through that first clipping experience for people at home. Thank you so much for the tips, Edmund.
Well, thank you guys so much for
And
having
I
me.
hope I've done it justice as a female, because clearly
you're a very informative host. I mean, you're very interactive, so you're versatile. So
you made it easy. You knew what to say. But thank you again, and we hope that people do try at home. And as we've said, if they do make mistakes, they'll probably still be at home when it grows out. So don't worry.
Definitely. I mean, we're hoping this year to have the 10th annual back to school drive.
Yeah.
I know that some social distancing protocols may have to be established. We're looking into those things. But I want to assure the public that we're going to definitely be here to provide some assistance during the summer months, leading up to school being reopened. So the people that are, kind of disenfranchised right now, I've heard of like 60,000 people applying for unemployment benefits so far. That's very devastating numbers. I mean, looking forward. So we're definitely going to try to see what we can do our part, and going to try to do more this year to try to see how we could provide some level of ease to the poor communities within Belize. I mean, we're definitely, our heart goes out to everyone right now. We're thankful to all the people on the front lines working hard, trying to get things going. And we're very grateful for the situation in Belize. Although we have lost some lives, it's not as bad as even our neighbors right now. So we're going to keep ourselves in prayer, stay focused, encourage everybody to stay at home, stay safe, stay sanitized, and stay healthy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Edmund. Do take care and stay safe too.
All right. Thank you so much, Marlene.
All right. So there you have it, the home haircut and beard grooming. I think those were some really useful tips. I know you feel probably very uncomfortable 3 weeks later, no trip to the barber. And we want to thank Edmund for telling us what we can do at home. We're going to shift gears now, and parents, this is your cue. Bring the children, put them in front of the television, because it's kids' time. This segment is brought to you by J&W Shopping Mart, and that's because you can jump online and order your groceries from them. That's one of the ways you can do online shopping, and they encourage you to do so. And in the meantime, we're going to have the kids in front of the television where they are going to learn about how vaccines work. So that's what's coming up. We are going to get moving into kids' time.